Louisa, but she isn't for all of us to be self-insulated. Even if you're creative, you don't always have the anger management issues that she had. Even if you're a creative person and want to be a writer, maybe you don't have the discomfort with her femininity that she has. The fact that she looks down on emotional expression really has such contempt for so-called feminine shows of expression. I don't know how we ignore this. The fact that she is kind of sort of a repressed misogynist in a way. She almost doesn't really like her own gender. I think some people read queer narratives or read a queerness into Jo or think she's trans but the thing is, from the book, I read her as she wants male privilege, I think. Yeah. And she wants to be a man. That's my interpretation.
I am sort of half in the trans theory section, but that's probably because I have been reading so much about Louisa. But then again, I also have problems with that theory because I was reading some of Louisa's diary markings from the time when she was in her 20s, and then, later in life, when she had extra money, she liked to buy, clothes. So Louisa May Alcott liked fashion. When she had Henry or someone else coming for a visit, she would brush her hair in front of the mirror, trying to be presentable. I can get behind some of these theories, but not all of them.
It's interesting to think about. I can definitely see that she was a bit gender fluid, but it's sort of like how, Frida Kahlo, the artist, she liked wearing men's clothing, but she also really liked the feminine part of herself. And as she grew into that, we can kind of see something of a similar situation with Jo. And I'm sure Louisa herself, I think, she kind of liked experimenting with that, and she probably was less strictly female in that sense. I can see that she was a bit gender fluid, and Jo a little bit.
Observing her sister's friendship with Julian, same with Whitman, who was also one of the models for Laurie. But I have a very unconventional opinion that Louisa May Alcott was somewhat lovesick person with her relationship with Laddie Wisniewski, because, there's the theory that he was a con man. It would kind of make sense that she would make these public statements that, this guy was a model for Laurie and, he's great and all that. And then with the letters that she wrote with May, they're criticizing him because Louis had her publisher sending him money. He never paid it back. And that kind of sounds like a con man behavior.
Yeah.
She met him in Switzerland. This was a year before she wrote Little Woman. And he was flirting with Louis' employer and with Louisa. Something happened between Ladislas and Louis' employer, and he had to leave the premises.
I think I read your blog post, and then also a bit of other information about him. He seems like a character. He is quite a character.
It's interesting because he becomes this Laurie archetype in Louis' novels that she always writes about, but the Jo-like character never ends up with him. The Jo-like character always ends up with the Frederick archetype. And I think that's so interesting.
Yeah, no, that is really interesting. It's really interesting to see how writers take little bits of experience in their lives and kind of mold it into their narratives, and you can just kind of see these little snippets from her life. That particular, he seems a little shady and also a little bit dashing.
There's the Faustian connection.
Yeah, definitely. I guess I find it really funny that there's Amy fans and Jo fans. They have to be in opposition to each other. Where I feel yes, they're the stronger personalities of the group as one. Did you have to pit two sisters against each other? That is so strange. What are they even competing over? They're not even competing over Laurie, which is a thing. Because I do like that, Amy is now being appreciated. I do really like that. I feel like the adaptation, the 2019, it makes her deeper, but also more superficial at the same time, and how it pits her against Jo, but then also, reveals a lot of her motives, reveals a lot about her mindset. I like that, but I also don't like how, I'm, gonna take this guy, and I don't want him if he's still into Jo. I never really got on board with that, and because I always felt like she was a person who knew her worth. she doesn't have to be in competition with anybody when it comes to anything like this. I recall that you didn't really like the 2017 adaptation interpretation of her. I guess, did you not like how negatively she was portrayed?
Yeah, maybe it was also the actor's age, because I think they should have had a 12-year-old play Amy. But I think it was the part of the cause where she gets the trip to Europe, because I felt that in the book Amy was very, very sad that she got something that Joe didn't get. But then in the 2017 adaptation, she was kind of gloating when Joe didn't get to go, and I think kind of martyrized Joe in the same way as the 2019 does. So I didn't like that aspect of the 2017 series. Like, I think it might have had one of the best Fredricks. But
I feel like no adaptation justifies why Amy went instead of Joe properly.
Yeah.
Like, they're either like, oh, Joe was too boyish for Aunt March, or like just chose Amy because Amy is just more artistic. They don't show how she really messes up that opportunity for herself. That is legitimate, I think. But an interesting detail of 2017. Remember that part before Joe discovers that Amy burned her book, and Joe actually gives her some candy, and then Amy kind of shows regret over doing what she did.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting detail, how like it kind of shows like, oh, she's just kind of a kid who's just like really messed up. I think that was a really interesting little addition to that scene. But I think the fact that she and Laurie also don't really have that kind of completing arc they should have had, I think that's something that's missing. And you also notice nobody ever really delves into her days at Aunt March's either. When that's also a big experience for her, where she's isolated from her family, and nobody really goes into that bit. Right? That's an observation.
Yeah, I think they did some of that in the 2017 series. You know, when Laurie came to see her, like that was nice. And then
there was that bit. Yeah, you're right.
Then there's the carriage kiss in the 1994 film. Somebody asked me about how Amy has sort of that arc with the servant of Aunt March. I can't remember the name of the French maiden. And she kind of introduces her to Catholicism, which has never been adapted, but it's really interesting because she is meditating, this 12-year-old girl, praying for Beth, and I think that was really nice, and I always liked that scene. It's never adapted, but maybe most filmmakers don't think that's very relevant, but I think it's really big for Amy's arc, because before that, I think the problem with Amy and Joe in the first book is that they are triggering each other in very negative ways, because Amy's using these long fancy words, and Joe is like, you shouldn't speak like that. She's really, really mean to her sometimes. For a while, they sort of become a bit closer when she returns, because she has become a bit more better at rejecting Joe's triggering points, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense.
And then in the beginning of part 2, there's this great scene that I really like. The narrator mentions that sometimes when they were arguing, they bursted out laughing because they realized how silly it was.
Yeah.
Both sisters grew away from that petty fighting. When I was younger, I was arguing with my sister. I don't think I have argued with her since high school. Become more perceptive about the other person's temper when you know them very well. And I think that sort of happens with Joe and Laurie as well. Like, they are being triggered with certain things that the other person does.
I think that's part of just being adults, is that when you're a kid, you kind of you see things very much from your own perspective, and you can't really get why the other person just can't come into your own mindset. But then you like when you're an adult, you see that other person as another like valid human being who has their own needs, and that's just part of growing up. And I think one of the benefits of being an adult, which is why I don't think Greta Gerwig should just think that adulthood is like this horrible, glum experience when you actually mature and actually your life gets better in many ways.
And I was reading some bits of May Alcott and how Louisa started to appreciate May after she had passed away in a more wider sense. They did become a lot closer when, later in age. You can really see that in Little Woman. Alcott Schooler, Emmeline Birch, she also wrote that there has been neglect among some Alcott Schoolers to do more research on May Alcott because Amy's portrayals in the films. Part of that also apply certain characters like Laurie and Fredrik as well. Laurie's not that exciting when his character arc is missing. I am okay with Laurie being a flawed person, and I liked him a lot more when he is this flawed person, even though he annoys me, because, I can appreciate his growth when he is this flawed person. Yeah, and with Fredrik, I think he's very enchanting with his Germaniness and, how, Louisa was very into Germany and all that. You don't really see those in the adaptations, so maybe there are not that many people who want to research them. I read tons of studies on Joe, and some of them were good, some of them were not so good, but then it was a lot more difficult to find anything on Laurie or Fredrik or their real-life counterparts.
I feel like people are kind of colored by the sort of popular imagination of these characters, and so they just don't delve into the research as much. I mean, I think that exploration of men growing up as well, I think, is also a really valid thing to acknowledge. The presence of toxic masculinity in Laurie, I think it does make him a lot more interesting. And the fact that that aspect of him is erased, it kind of leads to that over-romanticization of him. We've talked about a few times before. And so I think the commenter of mine talked about how hard it is to adapt Little Women really faithfully, because she's like, oh, well, there's all these different scenes that are very episodic, and it's very hard to adapt into the book. Or into a film or a show. I guess in a sense, yes, because when you have something very dense like Little Women, people forget how long it is. Yes, it's very hard to adapt every detail, and it's hard to put in everybody's arc. It's just hard to do. But I also feel like when you want to make a new adaptation of Little Women, you don't try and drastically change it. You go into things that already exist. You delve into other aspects of the story that maybe people haven't acknowledged as much before, and then you explore those things. And I feel like, an exploration of Laurie as someone who is essentially a toxic man, a toxic male, and just becomes someone much more mature and able, and actually a more productive person, I think, would add so much more to a feminist message. So I just feel like there's so much untapped ground, which, in adaptations, which I feel like people don't acknowledge as much.
Laurie's toxic masculinity, that sort of goes along with Joe's toxic masculinity, and how that affects this quote-unquote feminist narration of the novel. If you just say that only tomboys are feminist, that's only going to harm the feminist movement. That's not very realistic. With Louisa May Alcott, she has this sort of idealized idea of masculinity, but then again she also has these very critical views about masculinity as the novel progresses. That's really untouched ground in the adaptations. There is no balls to do that, or there hasn't been balls to do that yet. Maybe in the future. That will be interesting to see, hopefully.
I would definitely like that.
Thank you for listening. Take care and make good choices. Bye.